Board.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, good evening. My name is John Hoffman. I am the chair of the Department of Educational Leadership, and I'm not going to claim any special expertise tonight on writing the perfect resume, although I've had to write a few over the years. I know that Dr. Gautreaux had asked a number of us to participate as an opportunity for us to get to know you, to learn a little bit more about you, and also to get a sense of how the program works, and maybe also for you to learn a little bit about us. So as we get started, I am going to go ahead and shift over to a presentation that I will use throughout the evening, but feel free to chime in with your questions via chat or voice as we go, and we'll see what we can do to make things work.
John, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just one thing before we move on. If you could please open your chat window. So if you just take your mouse and move it to the bottom of the screen, everyone, you'll see some icons that appear, and one of them will say chat. Just click on chat, and a chat window will appear on the right side of your screen. That way you can use the chat window to type in any questions you might have, and then at appropriate time, John will stop and he'll answer your questions. And also at the end of tonight's webinar, if you could please answer the survey. I posted it in the chat window as well. That would be great. Thank you so much. Go ahead, John.
Gladly. Thank you, Dr. Gautreaux. And also, I just have right here, and feel free to use this information throughout. We'll probably communicate primarily by voice and by chat here this evening, but I have included my information there, including social media contacts. So if there are things that I can do to be helpful on the days or weeks or months to come, I would be very happy to do that. And so the agenda, what are we going to do tonight? Well, I'm going to try to keep it relatively focused. I'd like to talk about the resume maybe in a little bit different way than what you've perhaps experienced in the past, talking about it in a more holistic way as we prepare for a job search. It's not too often that you work on a resume separate from that job search. So we're going to talk a little bit of some of that holistic planning, and then going to dig in a little bit and say, so what is your resume's job description? What is it supposed to do? And how about the partners? With whom does that resume work? And then at the end, we'll spend a little bit more time digging in to some of the specifics. And again, throughout the process, would love to welcome your questions, your comments, your ideas. The expertise is typically more in the room than in the presenter. At least I hope that will be the case this evening. So in terms of holistic planning, this is the work that you do before you even pick up your pen or paper or your computer or laptop or tablet to work on that, on the resume. And so I ask you to actually just kind of forget about the resume for a moment and think a little bit more about the planning process. And this is an activity that you can work on. As you think about this, one of the things I'd like to encourage you to let go of is the idea of a resume or a CV, a curriculum vita. Let go of the idea of it as a laundry list. Too many times when I see the resumes or the CVs of other individuals, when I've been reviewing them, it feels like a long laundry list of everything that I've done, or at least everything that I can remember having done. And that usually works against you. Even with, is anybody here looking more in terms of academic types of careers? That's my discipline. And you can just kind of like put a thumbs up or an X or something in the chat window if that's you. I see at least one thumbs up there on the screen. So, we'll talk about a couple different types of disciplines, and I see a couple yeses there in the chat windows. Sometimes in education, you will use a curriculum vita, which, and we'll talk more about that later. It can be longer, but even with a longer CV, you don't want it to be just a laundry list. So what I would invite you to do as you start the process is, instead of picking up pen and paper, perhaps consider picking up a set of Post-its and just start to brainstorm. Brainstorm your strengths. What are the things that what are the areas where you feel like you are a content expert, where you have really strong knowledge? As you think about some of the different individuals who have presented, for example, I don't know if you made the session a couple weeks ago when Miguel Martinez, he comes out of our Career Center, and one of the areas where he is a content expert is working with LinkedIn. So that's one of the things where he has a high skill set. What are the areas where you are an expert? What about your skills? And not just all of your skills, but what are those signature skills, the things that you do exceptionally well? Sometimes it's hard to identify these yourself, and it can be helpful to go through this process with a colleague, a peer from class, an instructor, a mentor. Ask them to help to generate some of these ideas. We talk a lot in education about dispositions, which relate to our attitudes and our habits of the mind. What are your habits of the mind? There are some people who just are really good about whatever the question may be. They're the individual that helps us to remember about the justice and equity issues, or the person who remembers is always thinking about the budget, or somebody who is always thinking about work-life balance. What are those habits of the mind that you have where you find yourself continually bringing that perspective to your work? And then lastly, and in particular, because I think every job has things that we do that we just love doing. Perhaps we're not paid for doing those things so much. And then there are some other things that we do because, well, I'm getting paid. It's not something I'm excited to do, but I'm doing because it's an important part of the process. And so what inspires you so much that you're willing to do the crap work to make it happen? I think, for example, about my job as a department chair. Sometimes folks will kid that that's not the most rewarding job. As I think back over the past 4 years or so where I've served as a department chair, we've really done some special things as a department. And so when I have those moments when things are, another report, another set of tasks that I have to do, they're worth it because I'm contributing to something that's bigger. So you could go through a process of placing these types of ideas, the knowledge, the skills, your dispositions, those things you're willing to do, onto Post-it notes. And then I like Post-it notes because then you can start to cluster them and move things around and put them into groups. It's a process for engaging in synthesis, something we talk about a lot in our programs, for engaging in synthesis, for starting to cluster things together or group them together, because you're not going to be able to remember all the different items that you have on your Post-its. But if you start to cluster them together, and then you can start to think about a name for each item on the list, that may help you to move forward toward some themes that make sense for you. I would then invite you, as you start working on those themes, this is a great place to start working with your peers, with your instructors, with mentors, a current employer if you feel very good about your supervisor, and review your list, in particular your themes and what are some of the different parts of those themes, and then reduce. I don't know about you, but I can only remember a handful of things. And especially since the resume is just a first step toward what will hopefully be an interview, I know that I sometimes get a little nervous during an interview. And if I'm trying to remember 15 different things, I'm going to forget things. On the other hand, if I'm able to reduce that down into a list of 4 or 5 themes, those are things that I can typically keep in my head pretty well. Like, okay, what are my 5 themes? What are the things that I really focus on, the cluster of the ideas? And then I remember one of those ideas is leadership for me. And then, okay, so now that I remember that one of my 5 things is leadership, what are the pieces about leadership that I believe I'm really good at? Being a servant leader, remaining calm under pressure, being able to make difficult decisions, using data to inform the decisions that I make. Now I can start to remember things about those sets of clusters that are a little more focused. And then I can refine as I start to get to those areas. One of the things that I hear folks talk a lot about within that job search process is to develop a brand. Something that is short, that's concise, that really reflects who you are as a professional. At the very beginning, and I'm not going to say that this is perfect or great, it's a model for looking at things. But if you go to my LinkedIn page or if you go to my Twitter page, a number of those professional places, this brand statement of being a results-oriented student affairs leader committed to equity, inclusion, and student learning and success, that's something that I use in each of those places. So you'll see that wherever you look for me. And it comes back to 5 themes that, for me, are the things that I think about as I'm writing my resume, as I'm writing a cover letter, as I'm interviewing, is being focused on results. I spend a lot of time talking about data. I like data. I like to collect data and use that as a part of the work that I do. I'm focused on those results. Student affairs is my discipline. That means I like to work with students, in particular, outside the classroom. I like to work with educators who work with students outside the classroom to help ensure that they're successful. I'm committed to leadership. I talked a little bit about that a moment ago. Very central to my work is equity and inclusion, both the individual side of that and the community side of it. And then ultimately, I believe that success is measured in terms of what students learn and how students are successful. So those are 5 things that I try to remember when I interview. I also try to make sure that they are evident in my in all of my application materials. So I'd invite you to consider that process. And maybe before I go on to that next step, I said the first part I wanted to talk about was spend a little time with that holistic process. Are there folks who'd like to type in comments or questions, or like to share a comment or question just at this part of the process? Don't be shy. What do I think about including strengths as a question that just popped up? Great question. I absolutely believe that you should focus on strengths. As you go through that process of brainstorming, I think the brainstorm should focus on the strengths, the things that you do well. Strong organizations, I believe, start with employees looking at the things, what do they do well? And then they build the organization around employee strengths rather than the job duties for the organization. You always have to fill in, but I think those strengths are excellent. The Gallup poll that you mentioned, or the Strengths Quest process, is a great way to give you a sense. If you struggle in generating those ideas of strengths, that is an instrument that can help you to find it. And I see folks are posting, or Dr. Gautreaux just posted the link to the Strengths Quest. I know that when I look at my strengths, I have strategic and analytic. Those, again, that fits with how I approach results-oriented. I have self-assurance and command. Those are two of my strengths that relate to leadership in particular. And then I have deliberative, which has to do a little bit with that idea of anticipating the types of mistakes that come down. So I think it's, again, a great tool, and it can help. I would also encourage you to think about other types of tools. There's the Myers-Briggs, there's other personality inventories. Any of those types of tools can help you to generate a richer and more robust list of items on your Post-its, and to go from there in creating that picture of who you are. So there's a couple links there, and I'm going to go ahead and move forward with the presentation, and but again, continue to share your ideas as we go. So the next thing, before we get further into actually working on that, on the resume, I think it's important to be mindful of what your resume is supposed to do, how it fits into the broader job search process, and how it relates to other parts. So as I think about this, I think of your resume as being like part of a team, a number of different individuals or tools that do different things as a part of that process. And the primary focus of their work collectively is to reinforce that brand and to make someone want to meet you. So as you think about all of the materials, all the ways that someone's going to connect, you want them to have a really clear sense of who you are and what makes you special, but you also want to do it in a way that is engaging, that is interesting, so that say, I'd like to spend a little bit more time with that individual, see what they have to say. And so as you look at those different pieces, then you have a resume. Sometimes you just start with solely the resume. In other places, when you know the job that you're going to apply for, you often will pair it with a cover letter. I would invite you to think of social media as a critical component of any job search process. Again, I know that Miguel Martinez talked about LinkedIn a couple weeks ago on one of these sessions. If you weren't able to attend, I believe those are available for you to see. But also think about your other social media accounts, because I will tell you right up front, when I'm hiring, I check out people, I search for folks, I Google them, I look for them on various social media sites. Be mindful also of the name, your name, and what folks are going to find. I know that there might be a couple of you who are not as involved on social media. I don't want to push too hard on this, but I'd like to invite you to think of it this way. My name's John Hoffman. There's a few of us out there. If you go online and you Google John Hoffman, there's a number of individuals out there. I want you to see me. I want a potential employer to see me. And not only that, I want to make sure that when that potential employer finds me, that they are seeing the things online that I want them to see about me. I cannot control some of the things that other folks may post about me. As a department chair, sometimes I have to make unpopular decisions. I know that sometimes that makes it out there on social media. The best way for me to address that is not to try to get rid of those kinds of things on social media. Instead, it's to create a really strong digital identity for myself. If I am involved, if I'm posting to LinkedIn, on Twitter, etc., that helps to create a digital identity so that when someone searches for John Hoffman, they start to find things, messages, items that are out there. I would strongly encourage you to do that as well, and to think about how social media fits in. Of course, I also believe you cannot do a job search by yourself. You need to be using a professional network, talking with your peers, your colleagues, your faculty, mentors, others. This is an important part of your process. So let's and I see a question here, is this about including academic job searches and using LinkedIn? There are a number of tools for academic searches. I see that, actually that's something else, but a number of these searches, and there are searches elsewhere. Actually, I'm going to kind of come back around to this, because there is a difference between searching for a job and in some places you're going to post. So let's go a step further on this. When you think about your resume and the job that it has on the team, your resume is often the first item that someone is going to see. If you're thinking about a job board, you don't have a cover letter there. I'm not going to search for you on social media. I'm not going to try to use a network or connect someone else just off of that job board. The first thing I see is that resume. There are a number of academic searches where they invite you to post your resume or your CV online. So in many cases, that resume is your very first impression. And so its job is, if someone is just, I'm out there and I'm searching for resumes that are posted to job boards or to other types of sites, I'm going to skim through those resumes. There's a ton of them. Your job, the resume, the job it has is to get you into the pool. And then once you get that to that next step, get you through the screening. One other thing that your resume will do that you need to be mindful of is, in many cases, when it comes to a place where you start to interview, especially if you're going to interview with multiple individuals, not just a supervisor, as people start circulating, and for example, when I interview, it's often a day-long interview, and I'll interview with different teams of people. Those resumes are handed out to those interviewers in advance. And that's often where some of the questions come from, is they look to see what's on the resume and it becomes a source of questions. Now consider that as you relate it to a couple of the other items. Your cover letter. You're not going to place a cover letter on a job board. You're not going to place that cover letter. That's for when you are applying for a specific job. But your cover letter is going to allow you to tell a story, to go beyond just the specifics that are on your resume to really connecting to the job posting, and also to bring some life to who you are. As you think about that strategy, looking at your resume and your cover letter, getting that application in, you want to make sure that you are connecting and, whenever possible, using language from the job posting. Once you know that I want to apply for a specific job, I want to use the language of that job posting in my cover letter and, when possible, in aspects of my resume. That is different than that process where I don't know what jobs are out there. I'm going to put my resume on a job board or on a website and see if somebody comes across it. So they have different types of purposes. The other thing that you can do with a cover letter is it provides you an opportunity to move from numbers in your accomplishments to tell the stories. I accomplished this. As an educator, I was able to narrow the achievement gap in our program. That's something I can put that number. For example, when I was serving previously I was a dean of students. One of my accomplishments as a dean of students is that when I started in that role, there was a 12% retention rate gap, fall-to-fall retention between students of color and white students. After 5 years, we eliminated that retention rate gap. That number is something that I put on my resume. It jumps out. People often report, wow, that's an impressive accomplishment. In my cover letter, I explain how we did it, how we created new orientation programs for students and for families, how we worked with our student of color organizations and helped them with peer counseling skills so that they could better support one another. So your cover letter allows you to tell a story behind the numbers that you post to your resume. As you think about the LinkedIn account, again, I talked about this a moment ago. It's really important that you use your social media to create a digital identity so that when someone searches for you, you, as much as possible, can control what they find. And you want that to reinforce your brand. It's part of the reason that I use that same little short line on my LinkedIn account and on my Twitter account. Those are two of the places that it's the easiest to discover me. I'm a little bit more protective about my Facebook account and my Instagram account, so you won't find it there because those are individuals that I know. Lastly, your professional network, they help to reinforce your credibility and help you to become a colleague through that interview process. There's certainly times when your network is going to help you. They're going to help you to discover jobs. Hey, John, you told me you're looking for a job and you're looking for jobs in this certain field. I just saw this job here that may be of interest to you. There's going to be times when your professional network will help you to connect. But more often, your network becomes your references when you apply for a job. They become individuals that potential employers contact, and they help to reinforce the messages. It's also why it's so important. I can't tell you how many times students contact me and ask me to serve as a reference for them. And I love to do it. I'm happy to do it. But I'm surprised at how often I have to, in that moment, reply and say, I would be happy to be a reference, and what would you like me to emphasize if I receive a phone call? It's a little piece, but when students give me some talking points that relate well to their brand, that relate to key things that they're trying to express through the job search process, it strengthens that reference call because I'm echoing the kinds of things that they want to be sharing through their interview process. So each of the members of the team comes together and serves a different purpose in that overall process. And I think it's important that you're mindful of that because one of the things that I see in resumes is a lot of times people try to make their resume do too much. Because they're trying to establish a brand and tell a story and create that credibility in their resume becomes long, it becomes wordy, and again, we know that people tell us that first read of a resume, oftentimes 30 seconds is how much time someone's going to spend looking at your resume the first time. If it's long, if it's wordy, if you've got too much in there, people are going to end up glossing over it. You want to instead be focused on the key points in your resume. So let me kind of pause there as well. So as I kind of talk about the roles, where the resume fits in, what are some of the questions? Oh, yes, the Career Center, because you are all connected here to Cal State Fullerton. And so once you get a little bit further into this, by all means, make sure that you are using the Career Center. Whatever your discipline is, whatever industry you're working toward, they have professionals there who've been trained. There's going to be times when you might ask, should a resume be 1 page long or 2 pages long? I don't know the answer. It depends in many cases on your industry. There are some industries where that 1 page resume is really important. In other pages, it can last longer. That's a good question, Lynn. Lynn is asking, can we access the center after we graduate? I know that there are online resources. I don't know if you have access to the career counselors. Do you know, Dr. Cottrell?
Yes, actually you do for 2 semesters. You have access for 2 semesters.
Excellent. So there you go. So again, that is a resource. They will read that resume. They're going to catch the errors that you've missed. They're going to see things with a fresh set of eyes. One of the things I like to ask students to do at this point is to take your resume in. Don't say anything to the career counselor saying, here's my resume, can you read it and give me your first impression? You want to know, as they read it, are they going to see the same things? My resume, if I give it to them, are they going to come back and say, okay, so here's the themes that I'm seeing. You're spending a lot of time talking about being results-oriented, a student affairs educator, a leader, committed to equity inclusion, and committed to student learning and success. I want to know if they see that. I don't want to give them the answer before they read the resume. I want them to read the resume first and see if that's what's coming out of my resume for them. So it's a great resource for you for the resume, as well as for that cover letter, looking at your LinkedIn and other social media accounts, the whole piece. There are other questions here.
John, I wrote a question here because I think that it's worth discussing. It's about writing the resume first, and then should you revise the resume based on each specific job that you're applying to, or can you just create one standard resume and send that out?
It's a great question, and it's part of where we're going next, but let me preview the answer, or at least my thoughts on this. And my thought is that it depends. Again, it depends on the industry and how you're using this. There are times and places where you will post a resume to a job board or to a website for an academic, a search agency. At my point, when you get to further along in your career, if you're looking for faculty positions or leadership positions in your industry, there may be search firms that you would work with where you may share a somewhat generic resume with that organization. So you need to have that piece prepared. Then there's the other side of that coin where, okay, I just saw a job at Cal State Fullerton in the College of Education, and I want to apply for that specific job. Now I'm going to go back, I'm going to look at my resume, and yes, I'm going to refine some things. Maybe I'm going to add a point here and drop another point there to help make sure that that resume fits really close to the job posting. The same thing, in fact, even more so with your cover letter. I would say that it's a pet peeve for me when I'm doing faculty searches, when I receive letters, cover letters, where it is clear that this person has applied to jobs all across the country and every person is getting the same cover letter. If nothing else, change that first sentence that says, I'm applying for an assistant professor of educational leadership at Cal State Fullerton, rather than saying, I'm applying for a faculty position at your institution. But ideally, you should go in further depth. We did a search this year. We were looking in particular for someone who could address instructional leadership from a theory to practice orientation. That was strong emphasis in the job posting. I really wanted to see that in cover letters and even emphasized within resumes or curriculum vitas. So I think the answer is both. Well, let's move a little bit forward. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of actually designing that resume. So again, the first 2/3 of this is really thinking first, looking at yourself, some of that reflection work. What am I good at? What do I enjoy doing? How do I brainstorm these ideas? How do I synthesize them into several themes? Then I start thinking conceptually about the role of the resume as it relates to the rest of my job search process. Now it's time to write that resume. So this is from a source that I found online that I think is helpful. You can do a number of these searches online. Sometimes here's 10 characteristics, here's 20, here's 48 characteristics. Oh my gosh, that 48 is too many. I like 5 because it's focused. The first 3 points here focus on traditional aspects of a resume, starting with that at a glance objective right at the very top. I am searching for a faculty position in educational leadership. That dynamic branded positioning statement. I am a results-oriented student affairs leader committed to justice and inclusion and student success, student learning and success. That tight statement of who you are. And then you can also include keyword section. I'm not necessarily as excited about this as the writers of this article were, but I certainly see their point about trying to get some keywords in that are going to just jump off the page before you get in further. At the next step, so I'll maybe preview this next slide here. So that for these first three, I'm actually going to say perhaps. So when you're posting your resume to that job board, when you're sending it to a search firm, when you're sending it to posting it to a website, at that point, I believe you should have that objective and you should include that branding statement. Because the very first thing they're going to see after they see your name is, my goal is to get a position as an assistant professor in educational leadership. And they're looking through the website and going, I'm looking for someone who wants to become a faculty member in secondary education. I'm going to skip over this one and move next. It's only those folks who are looking for that position. So for those types of purposes, I think those top level objective branding statement and keywords can be helpful. If you know that you're applying for the job at Cal State Fullerton, I don't need to see the objective. When you're submitting a resume and a cover letter saying you're applying for the assistant professor of educational leadership at Cal State Fullerton, that objective statement is just wasted space because I already know that's your objective. You wouldn't be submitting your resume, your application otherwise. That said, for items 4 and 5, I think this is absolutely critical and always the case. It's very important that you separate your job duties from your job accomplishments. When I do resume reviews with professional associations, with colleagues, with students, etc., probably the number one mistake that I see is that people just list their job duties. Okay, I can extrapolate that from the job title. It is helpful to get a sense of those duties because a director doesn't always mean the same thing. But when you list those job duties, I have no idea if you were a great director or a lousy director. So I want to see a separate line of accomplishments that you have, and whenever possible, these need to be quantifiable. In fact, both aspects should be. I need to be able to tell you that I manage a $3.5 million budget. That's a quantifiable number. That's a job duty. As an accomplishment, I can tell you that over 4 years, I eliminated a $300,000 budget, a structural budget deficit, and created a 4-year budget model that is revenue generating. That is an accomplishment. So managing the budget is the job duty. What I accomplished, with that is that accomplishment. Both of those need to be listed and they need to be separate. And then lastly, it's important that you use concise, strong language and think about those types of terms that you like to use. And I'd invite you to go back to those things that, again, you're good at. I like to build things. It's one of the things I've enjoyed doing as a department chair is building programs. Okay, how do I play with that word build? One of the words that I use typically more in my cover letter than in my resume or curriculum vita is architect. That's a design build kind of concept word that I think adds a perspective to the role that I like to play in doing that type of work. The word design is another word. That's one that is often in my resume and CV. Find those strong words that relate back to the big concepts that you have those themes that you synthesized from your Post-it notes. Look for strong words and be willing to think creatively about how you use those words in the language of your resume. So a resume or a CV. Again, so I had asked that question earlier, how many of you are an academic? How many of you are looking at other types of industries? A CV is typically more common in academic realms. Sometimes it's also used in nonprofit organizations, a few other spaces. I would invite all of you to develop a CV, a curriculum vitae. In its purest form, a CV is an unabridged overview of your life's accomplishments. You put everything on there. Now, you're not going to give your unabridged CV to very many folks. It becomes long, especially, I'm young, but when you get to be my age, there's, a few more things that go on that. But nobody wants to see a 30 or a 40-page CV. But I have all of that there, and there are times that I can go back as I'm looking to apply for a position. If I'm applying for a position at a private institution, I'm applying for a position at a public institution, maybe I'm looking at a faith-based institution. Those are three different types of institutions, maybe a community college as a fourth. Those are different types of institutions where I could apply for a job. I'm going to pull different types of experiences out of my unabridged CV and put it into a more focused CV. And again, it kind of depends on where you're at in your career. You don't want, even if your field asks for that CV, you don't want to have 20 pages on your CV unless you really have 20 pages of meaningful content. Otherwise, people get lost and they page through page 1, page 2. Oh, this is just all fluff. Oh, and you didn't turn on to page 12 where I had all of my awards. And that was something I really wanted you to see, but you didn't get that far because I was just filling it up with fluff. So I invite all of you to generate that CV, something that you use just to keep track of accomplishments and jobs and things that you do over your lifetime. But recognize that whether you choose to use a CV or a resume really is going to depend on your industry and the type of job. Your resume is much more concise and focused. It's typically 1 or 2 pages, depending on the industry, and it's something that you should tailor and focus to the job, the industry, the organization that you're looking at. Again, there is that idea of the job board where it's going to be a little bit more generic, but whenever possible, you want to make your resume as focused. As I think about times in my life when I was doing a pretty aggressive job search at a lot of places, I had 15, 20 different versions of my resume that I would use depending on the type of position I was looking for. In terms of format, these days this is wonderful. You can search online. Microsoft Word has a number of wonderful formats where they do a lot of the formatting for you for the resume. Makes it very easy to generate that resume with those templates. And pick a template that fits you, but also that fits the industry. If I have someone who is applying for a position in design, there may be a lot of color. Things may be, some fancy, some flair, some choice of fonts to use in different ways that reinforces that idea that you have a mastery of design. In college or university, I'm going to look at something like that and I'm going to wonder, is this person a little full of themselves? Again, even when I did a consultation on my resume at one point, I remember they suggested that I place my name, on a big, bold font at the top of the resume. One of the first things I did was made it smaller. For some industries, that may make sense. You may want your name to really pop at the top of the resume. For me, given who I am as a professional and given the industry that I'm in, I felt it was more important to have a more conservative presentation of my name at the top of the page. Also, err on the side of less is more. As you really think about a resume, getting 30 cents of airtime, 30 seconds of airtime in its first iteration, you want to make sure that that's on the short list. There's only a couple things you're going to be able to say there, and the more that you say, it's actually going to be less because people are not going to read as much. They're not going to look at things as carefully. If you have fewer words on the page, I might actually read all of them. And then if you can add some of those really strong power words that you're using to help make your accomplishments stand out, fewer words around selected accomplishments is going to have your resume go further. In those opening sections, again, as I shared earlier, I think the opening sections are critical if you're going to post a generic resume to a job board or to a website or to a search firm. The objective is critical in those spaces, but in other places it just takes up a lot of real estate. Same thing with the branding statement. With those keywords, I think that can be something that helps to pull you out of a large pool in particular. If you're thinking about it, I know that there's going to be 100, 150 applicants for this position. How do I identify some words that are unique to me that might pull me out? And recognize you might not. But when you're one of 100, 150, 200 or more applicants for a position, maybe that word architect of new programs or something like that is a key word that is going to help pull your resume out of a pool. Somebody else is not going to like that word architect. Well, again, if you're one out of 150, you may have to take a gamble. If you're applying for a job, and you know what, I may be one of 15 or 20, I don't know that it's as important for you to include keywords, because if I only have 20 to read, 20 resumes to read, I'm going to read each of them relatively carefully. So be mindful of those opening sections. But the core, the heart of your resume is going to be your education, your accomplishments, and your experience. These are the key things that don't let all the rest of the fluff distract from these. Be very mindful of how you sequence. If your education is your strongest credential, put it first. If you've got great experience, put that first. Be mindful, if you really feel like, you know what, I have some key accomplishments, then maybe you have highlighted accomplishments at the top of your resume before you list your education and your experience. But be mindful of that sequencing. If you use a 2-page resume, be mindful of what's going to be at the top of page 2, because people are probably going to see what's at the top of page 2 more than what they see at the bottom of page 1. Think about the things that are going to jump out. Quantify those bulleted items. Don't say that I manage a large budget. Say I manage a budget of $3.5 million. Don't say that I manage a large staff. Say I manage a staff of 21 full-time equivalent faculty. Again, whatever that is, quantify it as much as possible and limit those bullet items. I don't need to know all the different things that you're doing in those roles. Too often, if you list 8 things, I gloss over and I don't catch any of them. List the 3 or 4 things that are most important. You can elaborate on the rest of those items in your cover letter or later in an interview process. There are some additional items that you'll often see on a resume, depending again on where you're at in your career. If you're, relatively If you're just getting out of undergrad and grad school, internships might be important. Volunteer experiences sometimes can humanize you, especially if you know something about the values of the organization and you could have volunteer experiences that align with that. Be strategic and do your homework. If you do your homework on me, you're going to know that in addition to education that you might see on my social media, that I make a number of posts about the volunteer work that I do with the homeless in Whittier, with a halfway house, and with the food shelter. If you have done that type of homework about me and you have similar types of volunteer experiences, put them on your resume. There's nothing wrong with being strategic about that, as long as you're being honest about those experiences. Additional training and certifications, again, I would say be targeted, be focused. Are they really relevant? Sometimes I see, the last thing I want to see on a faculty member's stuff is, okay, and I, have a certificate, I'm trained in Microsoft Word and Excel. I hope so. I hope you're able to use those. Do you need advanced skill in those areas? Not unless that's what you're teaching. So think strategically about those trainings or certifications that you put on there. Awards are great. I would say to those of you who may be closer to the millennial generation, awards are really important to you. When you're reaching out to folks like me and Gen X, we sometimes are less impressed with those awards. Especially if there's a large number of them, I'd rather see a couple significant awards than, oh, I got a ribbon for everything I did along the way. Again, that's one of my limitations. I recognize I've got a lot to learn from the millennial generation, but I'm also going to tell you that as I work with my colleagues, they sometimes see resumes or things where everybody's talking about all of these different accomplishments and these laundry lists of awards that someone has received by age 26. Okay, I don't know that has that same level of connection for folks. So be strategic and thoughtful about them. If you're working on a CV, you're going to add additional areas such as publications and presentations. If you're looking at faculty positions, you should be precise. Make sure that your reader knows, are these publications, were they peer-reviewed? Were they not peer-reviewed? Were they in scholarly sources? Are they in more professional sources? There's a difference between a newsletter publication and a journal, peer-reviewed journal publication. You might list courses that you've taught or service activities that you have, professional associations that you are in. All of these help to create that comprehensive picture. But just recognize, again, that's that CV where you're waiting for that moment when they're reading it a little bit more in depth. And lastly here, before we go, and we'll go into some more questions, but before you send it, evaluate it. No spelling errors. Folks, I just reviewed resumes, cover letters, CVs for people applying for faculty positions. And I saw them with spelling errors, with grammar errors, with formatting errors. Never send a Word file. I had folks who submitted their cover letter in Word, and when I opened it up, the first thing that I saw was all the track changes from different people who had read their document. Don't take that risk. Save it as a PDF. I also don't want anybody doing anything with your documents. Look at your resume from several feet away. As you look at those, does it look appealing? As you look at the headings, what are the things that jump out if you don't see the finer print? Those are the things that are most likely to be read. Have someone else skim it for 30 seconds. Again, Career Center is a great resource for you. What are the themes that they see? Do those themes match with the themes you want to be sharing? Review your brand. Is it there? And once again, absolutely no spelling errors, no grammar errors, no formatting errors. Those are deal breakers. It says This is so important, and when people see the mistakes there, they're often, if you're going to be sloppy at this point in the process, you're going to be sloppy on the job as well. I think that's just about everything I know. So we've got a couple minutes left here. Are there any final questions or thoughts that you have, or things you'd like to share? Well, I'm hearing crickets, and so I think that means either you've all checked out and your phones are just still logged on, or hopefully things are helping here. Go back, you said to slide 3 about the college network. Sure. Let me see if I can get there. Well, I don't know which slide we're talking about. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you're looking at for that college network? College, and I'm also seeing the keyword section again. There are times, so you're all coming through. As I shift away, I just closed that part. Let me open it up one more time quick. My apologies here. Okay, to share that screen again. Actually, I don't know if I'm sharing it well, so I'm going to just stop the share, and you're going to have to look at me here as we finish up with the chat. Keywords. What I would say is, as you think about, you've all gone through your process of, you've had to read scholarly journals somewhere along the way in your degree. Oftentimes, you've used search terms to help find those things. That's the idea of keywords on a resume. Especially when you post to job boards, there are times that employers will do searches. They're looking for keywords that out of very large job boards where they're trying to identify candidates that have specific sets of skills. So that's a place where those keywords can fit in. They also can help to establish that first impression, which again is really a primary purpose of your resume, is to create that first impression. What are the keywords that you would share? Again, they should align very closely with that branding statement that I tossed about. As for the network, again, I don't know exactly what the question is, but networking is really important when it's time to do that job search. Who are your colleagues that you are doing the search with? Do they know what you're looking for? I have a list of students, former students, current students, the jobs they're looking for, and I keep track of that. So I know folks I'm looking for jobs in career services, so I have a little list that I keep. Sometimes I get contacts. Someone says, hey, I've got an opening in career services. Do you know anybody? Give me a minute. In fact, I usually keep it on my Gmail. I send emails to myself, and then I can go back and kind of search for those emails in my Gmail to find out who was it that was looking for that career search or career center job again. But it's important to make sure that your folks in your network know what it is that you are that you're looking for, the types of jobs. What are you trying to emphasize as your skill sets? Make sure that, and this relates, I think, to this next question that is there, is that you are letting your references know what your talking points are. If I were to apply for a job today, again, I've shared with you some of my talking points. I shared that little brand line as being results-oriented, student affairs leader, committed to justice and inclusion and to student learning and success. Those would be, I would share those words with my references, saying these are the things, and I might underneath each one of them give a couple examples. So leadership, for example, I talked about that near the beginning of the session. For me, when I talk about leadership, I talk about being a strong servant leader. I talk about ethical leadership. I talk about remaining calm under pressure. I talk about using data to inform decisions. I talk about being able to make difficult decisions. Those would be some talking points that I would place under leadership that I would share with individuals who are going to be my references. If I were to talk about equity and inclusion, I might give them a couple examples of accomplishments that I have made in that area, so that when they receive that reference call, they're prepared, they have something fresh in their mind that they can think about. Oh yeah, John Hoffman, leadership, servant leadership, ethics, very ethical guy, uses a lot of data. Yep, justice and equity, does that too. Here's an example, I remember he did such and such. If you provide that information to your references, I think it's going to help them to be much stronger advocates for you when the time comes. Other questions? Skimming through the list here to see if there's anything I missed. See a post here from Cynthia. What is this post that you have here? Is this just another?
Actually, I reposted Molly. Molly, are you still there? Molly Ford had sent me, she had posted the question, but I think she accidentally sent it to me privately, about the keyword section in the resume, I think is what she was referring to. And I think you talked about it a bit. I was going to ask you a question, John, about an elevator pitch. Do you think it would be good for them to know what an elevator pitch is? I don't think they all know. Yes.
And I would say an elevator's pitch, when I talk about that, it comes exactly back to that idea of the branding statement. So when on that one slide, I had that branding statement as a results-oriented student affairs leader committed to justice and inclusion and to student learning and success. And I had 5 circles, because those are 5 things. So it depends on how many floors I have. If I'm going 2 floors, all I might be able to say is my branding statement. But for me, each one of those circles, each one of those key phrases on there is something else that I want to be able to talk about in my elevator speech. This idea that I just got on the elevator, I'm going up 8 floors with someone who might be a potential future employer. What do I want that person to hear from me between floor number 1 and floor number 8? So having that focus, it comes back to the brainstorming activity, to synthesizing and clustering and having some real key areas. And once you have those key areas, there's a lot of things that I forget, but I can usually remember those 5 things. And underneath each one of them, once I get started with any one of those, I can then elaborate and give you examples of accomplishments. It helps me to remember the kinds of things that I've done. Cynthia, are there other things that you can think about that you think are missing? That
well, you have a question here from Peter. He
okay.
wants to know if it's okay to include his home address in the header of his resume.
Unless you believe they need to contact you at that, I think you can be much more focused these days by providing the information that, how is it that you want them to contact you? So you can have, with the vertical line, you have your name potentially at the top,